Hello, low ego action heroes. It's Debbie Levitt from Delta CX, and it is that time again. It is Monday, November 2nd, 2020. And won't you also be a low ego action hero? And today we have a live podcast with special guest, Dr. Seth Finkle. He is back, and I am going to invite him into the universe in just a moment. But first, I want to remind everybody, we still have it open if you want to get the Acture courses or the live Acture workshop at a discount. If you'd like to learn Acture and go from holy cats, I don't know what's going on, to confident intermediate, check out deltacx.link/DEC for December 2020. We'd love to have you there. I want more humans there. I think we have maybe 15, 18 people signed up. So we need more humans. So I'm going to bring in Seth. Dr. Seth, you'd think they all know you by now, but won't you please introduce yourself and make it sound good?
Make it sound good. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Seth Finkle. I am a psychologist located in the Lehigh Valley of Pennsylvania within the United States of America, and work in schools and as a lecturer at colleges and occasional guest spot here at Debbie's Universe. So welcome to it. Thanks for coming to our TED Talk.
Right, and scene. I've got a new graphic for that. And scene. Okay. So as always, we are live. If you're watching live, Oz says hello. He's throwing the party icon. I can actually put this up on the screen now. I don't know if this is new. Did I have this last time you were here? Oz says, "Oh, it's Seth." So
what?
Yeah, so you are a very popular man. So today we're going to talk about earning respect, and I want to tell the audience and of course Seth a little bit about the background of why this even got scheduled. So there were a couple of things colliding in my world, and one of them was the story of a woman I met at a conference where I talked about UX needing to regain our autonomy and keep our power. And she came up to me and she said, well, I got a new job and I was coming in as a UX manager, and I realized I had to earn respect, and I did this and I did that. And it was a bunch of things I wouldn't have recommended. And I said, what made you think you got a manager job and you didn't have respect? Why did you act like you didn't have respect? And then she goes, oh my God, what have I done? And there was that. And then there was also, maybe it was an office hour some weeks ago, Maggie P will remember, where somebody had asked something about how do you make other people respect you more? And I was like, stop imagining you don't have respect, just own it already. So, then we were thinking about shirts that say like, own it, but I think Oprah will sue me. So I started throwing this at Seth, like, why does it keep popping up in my world in whack-a-mole style? We've got to earn respect. And you'll also hear like, if you want to earn respect for the UX profession or hold more workshops, invite more people to participate in UX design, get everybody doing UX work with you. That's the short version. So I thought I would drag Seth over, and he was kind enough to say yes. Seth, where do we start with this?
I mean, maybe we start even before the beginning and say it's funny. My observation is you and I end up unpacking buzzwords. It seems like that's what we do when we get together. We've had a lot of those, so it seems only right that we do this. So Christine Porath of Georgetown University, she surveyed just short of about 20,000 employees around the world, and she found that her respondents ranked one important leadership behavior far and away more important than any of the others. Any guesses?
Free coffee.
Foosball? Waka, waka, waka.
Foosball? Silicon Valley?
Incorrect. Respect. RESPECT.
Find out what it means to me, Seth.
Well, that's what we're going to do. So,
okay.
So obviously it's important to everybody. The question is, what the heck is it? And interestingly enough, I did what I often do when I am faced with a question of what does a buzzword mean, and I Googled it.
Etymology.
And here's what Google says. I'm going to actually read from Google here for a second, because in addition to the verb form of the word, there's two different noun definitions. And I'm going to focus on the two part for a second because I think that's important. Number one, a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. Okay, deep admiration for something based on their characteristics. Two, due regard for the feelings, rights, or traditions of others, which is kind of the low bar. That's the everybody deserves to have basic human respect, right? Basic dignity, that sort of thing. And I think, to me, I think it's important to note that there's two different terms. And as it turns out, I'm on the same page as a researcher by the name of Christy Rogers at Marquette University. She supported the idea that there's actually two different types of respect, and that the relationship between them in the workplace is actually really important. Helpfully, she gives them names. She calls them earned respect and owed respect. So let's, if we may, just one moment longer here on the definition portion of the show.
We've got like an hour. Go for it.
Excellent. Okay. Earned respect is a way that we recognize someone's unique talents and strengths and experiences, right? It's basically the idea that someone has the stuff and we recognize that in them. And so we're giving credit where credit is due. On the other hand, owed respect is a way that we acknowledge and honor the inherent worth and dignity of every member of the group. It should be given to all members of a work group or organization, according to Rogers, because it addresses the universal need for people to feel included, to be part of something larger than themselves, and because, frankly, everybody has value. But it turns out this is a tricky balance. Rogers and one of her colleagues, Blake Ashforth at Arizona, they were talking about how it's actually really difficult to strike the right balance between owed and earned respect, because too much owed respect and people can feel kind of interchangeable, and individual skills and performance can seem unimportant and unvalued, and too much earned respect creates sort of a cutthroat atmosphere, and it places too high a value on employee competition rather than collaboration. So the idea is there's this delicate balance that has to be struck in any workplace by the leadership of the organization between basic respect that everybody is entitled to and this kind of earned respect that people they own because of the fact that they have very particular characteristics or values.
So I want to jump in if I can.
Please.
So if I said, Seth, you're a school psychologist, you talk to kids, you help them with their problems. Anybody can be a school psychologist. Is there any respect in there? Does that qualify for either of those definitions?
Well, let's see. So
what did I just do? What would you call that?
Well, I would say you're dissing me. But that's just me. I prefer getting down verbally. I mean, let's face it. Everybody has a job that, from one vantage point, probably looks pretty easy. I mean, brain surgeons, they need pretty steady hands, and they have to have a pretty good idea of what they're doing. But in any given moment, I'm not a brain surgeon, but at any given moment, you would think the actual job of what has to be done is probably not crazy hard. By the same token, there are brain surgeons, and I wouldn't want anybody cutting open my head and operating on my brain without the requisite set of skills and experiences and really steady hands. So if someone were to say, is it to be a school psychologist? On one level, yeah. I mean, I could probably teach someone sort of the 3-second version of what I do, and it's not going to sound super challenging. On the other hand, there's a lot of days where my head is spinning and I'm struggling to keep up with all that's involved in the demands of that job, and I've been doing it a pretty long time. So yeah, I'm with you. point taken that in the UX CX world, I think part of the problem is people don't understand what you guys do. And as a result, there's a tendency to, maybe that's not a result, but in line with that, I think people tend to kind of minimize the importance of things that they don't fully understand.
Yeah, that's
So yeah,
probably a habit a lot of people have, is to minimize things they don't understand. So let's say we're working together, and I like you and I think you're competent, and I want to make
back
sure
at
that
you.
yeah, thanks. So many years later, we finally made it. And let's say I'm a friendly person who wants to make sure you feel appreciated. What are some things that I can do or say that make sure that you know I respect you, that you know I have that appreciation for who you are or what you do, at least at a work level?
Okay, so let's unpack that slightly, because if we're using this concept of owed versus earned respect, there might be two different sets of things.
Mm.
If we're talking about owed respect, you might be doing things like actively listening to me. What I hear you saying, Seth, is blah, blah, blah. Am I
I was
getting
just
that
going to
right?
say, so you're saying that I should be actively listening, but that was too
Yeah,
cheesy a joke.
exactly. So I went there for you.
Thank you.
Valuing diverse ideas and backgrounds. You and I are coming from two different places, but I still think that what you have to offer is important, even when I disagree with you. Maybe especially
Okay.
when I disagree with you.
Okay.
Um, those are sort of owed respect things. That's the lowest possible bar as far as I'm concerned. Although interestingly enough, there's huge percentages of people who report not even getting that in the work environment on a regular basis. That there's a lot of patent disregard for someone's value that's happening at every level all the time. But if we say that's the owed respect part, that's probably the easiest and most obvious stuff that we can do for most of us, especially for the high empathy crowd watching you right now. Um, in terms of how we pay people respect that is earned respect, I think that's a little different. I think that's much more specific. And in this case, I would say you know a tremendous amount about UX and CX, that people come to you as an expert on the subject, and that level of expertise is something that I can acknowledge and I can defer to at times when I recognize that you have more knowledge and experience and information on a particular subject than I do. We both
Okay.
have value in a conversation, but I'm not going to pretend to know more about UX than you do, because to me that would be patently disrespectful of your experience.
Right. And I'm not going to pretend to know more about psychology than you do
That's the deal, right?
while you're on
That's
the
the way.
show.
And when I'm off the show, I don't even know, so it's all good. Um, and each of us can know a shred about the other stuff. You probably know more about my field than I know about yours. But the bottom line is, it's about each person's individual contribution and what they bring to the table. And I think on a very basic level, it's about acknowledging that, and about giving credit where it's due. That some people have a particular perspective that's unique and that deserves to have attention paid to it. That to me is the way I try to do it. In every work group that I work in, I'm much more interested in what the other people have to say on matters of their expertise, but I'm not shy when I know something and I can contribute something and bring it to the table. I'm not going to ask them to tell me what their opinion of my work is, or my job, or how they would do my job, because that to me would be silly. That's not respectful of myself.
Right. Right. That's it sounds like giving up your power and autonomy if you say, like, if you act a little bit too, I don't know if passive is the right word, but to be like, "Oh, well, look, I'm the expert in psychology, but hey, you're in this meeting too. What do you think about psychology?"
Sure. Right. Yeah, I think you have to own, as you were saying, you need to own it. You need to own your role and your authority and your expertise, because that's why you were hired. That's what you bring to the. You wouldn't be getting paid if you didn't have that to offer to a team in some fashion. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'm with you. Once you're in the front door and the organization has said you have enough value and you hold enough clout that we actually care about you and we want to bring you in and we want you to add value to our team, I think you'd be doing a disservice to everybody to hold that back. But I think you can do it in a way that's sensitive and diplomatic without having to sacrifice your self-respect or your role.
We've got our first question from Oz, if I can interrupt you there.
Please.
Okay. And everybody, please on YouTube, don't just subscribe to me, subscribe to Oz. He's Excel on fire. You will learn stuff about Excel. He recently taught me pivot tables, and I'm grateful. Oz says, how do you distinguish between disrespect, contempt, and resentment? I've heard that once contempt shows up, a relationship has no chance.
Ooh, good question. And now we've got all kinds of vocabulary, which is that's our wheelhouse.
Furiously
right?
Googling.
We do words. I'm not even. I know those words. I can do that.
Words are us.
So let's think about these for a second. So disrespect pretty much makes sense in the context of what we're talking about, right? If you are undermining someone's authority, if you are engaging in, and disrespect in this regard is, again, we can look at it sort of from the verb or the noun perspective, but it kind of connects here. It's the idea that you are not paying someone that level of owed and or earned respect that they're probably due. And I think that's the most basic. We probably all do this to some extent a lot. Even the most empathic among us end up occasionally engaging in disrespectful words or actions or assumptions without even knowing that we're doing it. It's easy to kind of fall into that trap.
Yeah, I think of it as like a lack of appreciation for someone, appreciation for who they are, what they've been through, what they can bring to a team, or what's going on personally. So I guess I'm starting to think of respect in that way. You want to jump on contempt?
Well, so even before I do, so it can be something as small as failing to CC someone on an email, right? Or invite someone to a meeting, right?
Right.
And in many cases,
that can feel
it's
disrespectful.
Exactly. I mean, it may not have been intentionally disrespectful, but it's an oversight that can feel disrespectful to the person because they feel like they're not valued, or that they're just simply forgotten as just a random team member, when in fact they might have something really valuable to add to the conversation. So disrespect on that level, I think, is much more basic, kind of garden variety, everyday stuff that we're all faced with. Resentment and contempt, I think, are a little different. From a psychological kind of psychobabble standpoint, resentment would probably be the next one up the chain to the kind of the big whammy. And resentment is when you start to feel envious or jealous. You start to feel a pattern of being disrespected by someone else. You start to feel
I often associate
angry.
it with regret.
Sure, it can. I think a lot of these sort of negative feelings kind of get wrapped up, and then resentment essentially becomes this kind of wall that's up between a person and another person, or between a person and something else. I resent their success. I resent the fact that they are feeling satisfied with an outcome when I'm feeling totally ignored.
So it sounds like it could even be a reaction to the disrespect.
Sure, exactly. I think it may be an emotional response to feeling disrespected. If you're very sensitive, maybe one really big one, or it could be something that's a pattern of disrespect that you've been shown for a long period of time, and you have this emotional response to it. Contempt, kind of in a class unto itself. That he is correct when he says when contempt shows up, a relationship has no chance. There's a lot of fairly famous studies of marital and committed relationships between people, and contempt, as it turns out, is the early warning that things are not going to work out. And there's lots of other reasons why relationships don't work out, but when contempt is part of that relationship, it's not that it's impossible to address or to remedy, but it's very hard because it's really kind of it's kind of this calcified form of resentment. It's when it goes from resenting someone, which is more of that emotional response, to really kind of low key hating that other person.
Yeah, I think
And
of it as hate.
I think that's kind of how it plays out. It's feeling that the other person is your enemy. And once that happens, it's really, really hard to try to undo that. So that's one of the first indicators in sort of the research that's gone into looking at relationships. They found this by just watching couples interact with each other and then longitudinally looking at how those relationships ended up over time. And any indicator of contempt was really kind of almost a surefire sense that if something didn't change, that relationship was done. And I think the same thing is absolutely true in the workplace, that if you are feeling contemptuous about the workplace, it's going to be poison. It's going to destroy your ability to get on board with whatever the mission is of the organization. It's going to be you against them in a way that's absolutely going to be problematic. You're going to end up, whether you mean to or not, and sometimes you might, you're going to end up being in a situation where you're going to find yourself undermining things, sabotaging things,
Or withdrawing.
and really withdrawing, right, working at cross purposes with whatever the overall agenda is. So yeah,
And if
think
I can take
contempt
a
is
step
definitely a killer.
a step back from that for me, and again, I'm no psychology expert, but I always feel like a work or personal relationship is sometimes irrevocably broken when there's a breach in trust. You know, even
Yes.
before there might be contempt, maybe even before there's resentment, there's usually some sort of breach in trust. And even when I think about work experiences, I can think about a time that, quick story, and I may have told this one before, so everybody drink. I was on a project some years ago, and the product manager was a real bully, and she wanted everything designed a certain way. And her idea was terrible. We knew it wouldn't work. I even escalated it up the chain of command in my department, and everyone said, no, 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 her idea is wrong, don't do it. And she kept saying, wireframe my idea, you know, draw my idea. And I kept saying, I'm sorry, but we all don't want to do that. And she was acting like we should do that. Finally, they said, look, just wireframe her idea and just document next to it the 4,000 reasons why we're not going to do it. And I said, I will bet you $10 that she will cut out the wireframe from the reasons why we're not doing it and present it in the next meeting as what we're going to do. And everyone said, no, no, we know her. She wouldn't do that. We would. Seth, have I ever been wrong about any prediction? Why does anyone bet against me? You've known me 30 years now. How often am I wrong? Anyway, it's not about me. Needless to say, that's exactly what she did. And of course, at that point, trust is broken. Now, in the future, if I'm stuck working with this product manager, whether or not I resent her, whether or not I feel contempt for her, that trust is broken. And she would either have to not give a crap, or she's going to have to do something to earn that respect back. And that brings it back to respect. If we've had a breach in trust, if she's gone and done something sneaky like that, can things be redeemed? What could she do to earn that respect back?
I think that's a great example. And I would say you probably should add to your various titles modern day Nostradamus or interpersonal soothsayer, maybe.
Say unto me the sooth.
You do have an uncanny knack for interpersonal sooth. But
it won't even fit on my business card.
That's what the back of the card is for. Yeah, so trust, absolutely. Once that's blown, very difficult to get it back, particularly under circumstances where it feels like it was intentionally blown. It's one thing when someone, you know, you rely on them for something and they fail to remember to do it, or they, you know, they're coming out late on something, or they fail to incorporate you into a discussion or something like that. We can probably forgive a lot of those things and let them go much easier. But when you feel like someone is gunning for you and they stole credit, or they threw you under the bus, or they are talking crap about you behind your back in a way to try to undermine who you are and your role, yeah, I mean, those are intentional actions that are, they're going to be perceived by us as contemptuous, as not just disrespectful, but as downright mean-spirited and as an attack. And under those circumstances, I think it is very difficult. It's possible to rebuild trust, but I think it's super, super hard. Trust is one of those things that's a whole lot easier to keep and maintain than it is to try to re-earn. And I agree with you that there is this intermixing relationship between trust and respect, that if we feel heard and trusted and valued, and we feel like it's sincere, I think it's more likely that we're going to end up feeling comfortable being vulnerable in a personal or in a workplace relationship, sharing our creative solutions when in fact we might be taking a risk sometimes in doing that. Going out on a limb with something that maybe we're not 100% sure on, but we feel comfortable because we know we're with a group of people who are gonna be okay with us doing that, and they're not going to make us feel badly about it. There's a great little anecdote that I printed out because I wanted to wait for a moment, and I figured there would be a moment to read it. It was an Apple sales associate, and you and I were just talking about how we're PCs. But I had said I have a lot of respect for a number of things about Apple, both their product line, but also just the way their corporation runs. And there's some good and some bad. In terms of their interface with the outside world, perhaps it's not always great. But in terms of their relationship with their employees, this was one account. It was an Apple sales associate who described his first impression of the company's CEO in a blog in 2011. And it said, he said, "For Tim Cook, there are no dumb questions. When he answered me, he spoke to me as if I were the most important person at Apple. His look, his tone, the long pause. That's the day I began to feel like more than a replaceable part." And I thought that was a great example of owed respect, of giving everyone the sense that they have value within a system. And that's not even saying this person had any skills at all. It was simply saying, I owe you the basic courtesy and being able to make you feel valued. And the only way that really works is when it's sincere. If it's insincere, if you only do it in front of the person and then you talk crap behind their back, or you then don't follow through on things you said you would do, or you undermine them every step of the way, people see through that in seconds. So I think that's an easy way to lose trust, is to be inconsistent about that kind of thing in the workplace, to say one thing and then do something very different when you interact with the person, or when you speak about them behind their back or things like that.
I want to jump in on something, because one thing I hear a lot when I speak at places or when we do Tuesday office hours, Ask Me Anything, which of course is tomorrow, is I often hear people saying, I know that my teammates don't trust me. They don't act like they trust me. The product manager says, I'll sketch the screens. The business analyst says, I'll interview the customers. The engineer says, I know what customers want. Why are you taking so much time? And people feel this sense of distrust and disrespect. And very often they'll come to my office hours and they'll say, I feel disrespected. I feel distrusted. How do I earn these people's trust or respect back? And I usually tell them that that's very hard, and if trust and respect really are that broken, you might just have to polish up your resume and move on. But now that we've got you here, if you feel like, if I'm in a job situation where all of my non-UX teammates are just sure they can do my job just fine, is there something I can do to snap them out of that and get them to trust me more and let me do my job and get out of my domain and be a collaborator, but not I can't even think of an amoeba, engulfing me?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. I actually found myself, I would say, marginally comparable situation a few years back. I was working with a supervisor, and we hit a point where, for a variety of reasons that I was actually, frankly, at a loss about. I didn't understand how it started, but I was picking up pretty clearly the fact that this person had a number of misgivings about me. They were looking over my shoulder. They were micromanaging in a way that they hadn't before, and it clearly felt not okay. It felt disrespectful, and it felt, frankly, sort of paranoia-inducing on my part. It was kind of like, do I have to worry about whether I'm going to lose this job? Like, what's going on here? And it really felt like it came out of left field. So I took the liberty of actually having a conversation with this person. I sat down with them one-on-one behind closed doors and said, this is what I'm perceiving. Am I picking this up correctly? And they said, yeah. And I said, can we talk about that? I'm curious to know how this came about. And I actually asked directly, is it something to do with the quality of my work? Is it my professionalism? Is it? And they said, no. And then brought it back to one specific moment in time that was a non-issue to me, something that I hadn't even noted was an issue. And it was apparently very much an issue to them. And I said, well, I feel really badly that happened. What do we do about this? And we talked about it together, and we came up with what I think was a reasonably fair solution for both of us. And it did resolve. It wasn't an ongoing pattern of problems that, I was engaged in, where someone was questioning my ability to do my job. That's a whole different story. And I agree with you.
You said or did one thing once, and they were like, oh, what a jerk.
Right. And I think they were thinking, well, there's a pattern here that I want to make sure doesn't happen again. So maybe the person was burned by other people who had something similar happen in the past, and they wanted to make sure they're kind of protecting themselves. Okay. I don't have it personally, because it's not about me. That's about something that came up between the two of us, but I'm not incidental to it. And so we can have a conversation about it as two people. I was a subordinate, but I was willing, it was scary, but I was willing to have that conversation and say, I can't continue to work here. This has become a hostile work environment for me. I can't continue to show up and do my job and stay focused on my work and do the kind of work I know I should be doing if I'm distracted constantly by the fact that there's this issue between us. So I would say, not that that's the be-all, end-all solution to every time there's a breach of trust in the workplace, but I do think communication is really important. And I think doing it non-defensively is hard.
And do it privately.
Privately, right. And in the end, I had actually asked, can we have this conversation off the record? Because I work in a union shop. And the answer was, we can talk about this part of it off the record. And when we get to this part of it, then I feel more comfortable talking about it on the record. And I said, that's perfectly fine. Because we were able to talk about the terms up front and come up with a solution that worked for both of us. We're still not best friends by any means. There's still kind of a coolness between us. But this person and I could get along in a work environment without having to feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells around them. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't feel comfortable enough coming forward and saying, I know I do good work, and I don't understand why we have this problem. Can we talk about it?
Yeah, and I've told some of the people who show up to the office hours and ask questions that if they can't have that direct conversation with someone, that it might be a time to bring in a manager and to say, like, look, I'm kind of junior here. I'm not totally familiar with how to have some of these difficult conversations, but I can tell my team doesn't understand what I do, or doesn't care for what I do, or doesn't respect what I do. Bring in a manager to talk to the team or to talk to other people's managers and try to figure out what's happening there, and do try to resolve it. Like, don't just quit, or unless it is a very bad workplace. I'm not going to tell you to stay in one, but I do think that some of these can be improved through these conversations. I remember someone at a workplace pulling me aside in a private conversation because she kept bringing up these things in a meeting, and I kept saying, no, I disagree with that. And she seemed to take it quite personally. She pulled me aside in a room and she's like, we have to be aligned. and I feel like you're cutting me down. And I said, well, I'm not cutting you down, and we don't have to be aligned. Like, it actually is okay if we don't see this issue the same way. We still have to work it out, and we still have to come to a decision, but I'm not going to automatically agree with you just because you've brought me into a private room and asked me to align with you. That's big corporate speak, Seth. I don't know if you hear that one in your world, but it's always, we need alignment, which is usually some corporate speak for someone trying to tell someone else to roll over and play dead for someone else. And I just said, I'm sorry, we might not be aligned. And I, this woman and I ended up not getting along, but I just said, look, we can still be civil about this. I'm not going to fight you in a meeting, but I'm probably, if you're going to continue to take this line, I'm going to continue to disagree with that. And, hopefully we'll just find a compromise.
Right. Absolutely. Another great example. I don't know if you and I have talked about this before, Debbie. I think maybe we have at some point or another.
There's something we haven't talked about?
I know, it's hard to imagine. That we probably have. There's a common thread that I keep coming across between the work that you do and the work that I do. There's actually a lot of them, but there's one in particular that comes to mind, and that is that you and I, and by extension, UX, CX, and school psychologists in particular, among the other types of psychology that I do, the school psych work, we're both kind of in an interesting position in a system, because we represent something where we're both part of a team, but we're also kind of a free agent, and we're advocating for someone other than ourselves.
Very true.
We're essentially the voice for people who don't have the ability to express themselves in the conversation. And that's a problematic place to live in a workplace. I'm guessing you guys and I have had very comparable experiences of having to be essentially the person holding the line where everyone else is saying, why can't we just do this? This is the easier, quicker, cheaper thing to do.
Right.
And our statement is, but it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And when you find yourself in that position, it's easy to kind of take the moral high ground, because that is where we're sitting, frankly. We know we're right. But, and we're often being told, and in fact, in a prior podcast, I think I've even advocated for the idea of trying to kind of achieve some kind of buy-in, get them to align with us, right, as it were. And I also know that that's not always going to happen. And sometimes we just stand our ground on something, and we come across as the prickly, curmudgeonly Lorax who's speaking for the trees.
Artsy-fartsy hipsters in my world.
Yep. And people don't like that. They find it irritating, and they find it a nuisance or an obstacle to getting their work done. And what I try to do on a routine basis is to remind people why I'm there, that there's a reason why I'm part of this conversation. In fact, in my job, I'm legally mandated to be part of that conversation. Schools can't function in the public setting in the United States without a school psychologist being part of a team when certain things are being talked about. And the reason for that is someone's got to speak up for the person who's not part of the conversation. And I try to do that in a way that's not overly defensive or hostile, but I'm firm about it with people. This is my role. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like what I'm telling you. You don't even have to agree with me or do what I'm saying. But I have a moral, ethical obligation to say what I'm saying, and to stand my ground on this, and to be the difficult person in the conversation right now, because someone's got to do it. And that's a hard place for me to be, but I'm going to do it, and I'm not going to apologize for it. And what's interesting is people actually, over time, come to respect that. There's a period of time where people start to recognize, I think, in many settings, that there is value to that. They may or may not love it, and they may fight you every step of the way on it. But I'll be darned if they don't usually say, you know what, Finkel's the guy we want as part of this conversation, because he's going to be honest about this, and he's going to he's going to say the right thing here. And we're going to have to just grapple with that and figure out what to do, how to make something work in line with, at least have his words be part of the conversation. And I think that's true of UX CX as well, based on the way you've described it to me and my conception of it. You guys are the people who have to be saying, yes, I know these are not convenient things or cheap things or easy things to hear, but they're important things to be heard. And it's my job to say them.
Yeah, we are often riding the elephant into the room, if I can make that up. So one thing that I have been saying more and more, especially since in our world we're being dominated more and more by agile software development, who wants to try to say that we're too slow and we're not agile and all of this. And I just remind people there's Agile Manifesto principles. I don't know if you know this. The Agile Manifesto was written in the year 2000. It's not the most current approach to things, but Agile Manifesto principle number 5 is give motivated individuals the time and support they need and trust them to get the job done. And I say to people, I'm part of your team. I am motivated and I need support and I need time. And ultimately, we are more agile when you allow me to do my job rather than try to bulldoze that or steamroll that or amoeba that.
Mm-hmm.
Marisol says, people will notice when you are questioning things for the sake of questioning versus for actual issues that you see. Put that up on the screen. Marisol has a picture of her now with a mask on.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's exactly correct. That most people have a pretty good BS meter, and they can usually tell when someone is just being difficult versus addressing something that is a legitimate issue. And I think part of that is because if you do it sincerely, people pick up on sincerity. I truly believe that's maybe one of the biggest secrets in humanity, is that just being honest and sincere and open in interactions with people is something like 98% of what's needed for success. If you can really hear them, and that it's a two-way street. I mean, to be fair about it, you or I may not always be sitting in the place that while we may feel sort of righteous about our role, we still may not be holding all the information. We're probably not. Someone else has other perspective on budgets and on sort of the politics of the work, or on some of the logistics that are involved in it that perhaps we're not privy to. And we're coming in speaking about something in a kind of essential, sort of theoretical way in some cases, that this is something that has to be done because it's the right thing, because, this person needs this to happen in order for the world to be a better place. And someone else says, yeah, but we can't do that in 3 days with the budget that we have. Realistically, that's not going to work. And I love those conversations. And I let people know that I sincerely love those conversations, because now we're actually talking about something. Because now the two of us can agree, we can be part of a collaborative conversation about how do we deal with these two competing ideas and get them to work together. And as long as the two people or a group of people are on the same page, that's important. As long as you give people freedom to express their concerns without shutting them down, I think they're more likely to do that with you. It's not always the case, but I think it's more often the case. If you praise people behind their back because they're smart, whether or not you agree with them, they're smart and they're good at what they do, I think you earn more credibility yourself, and I think you earn more of their trust and respect in a roundabout way. If you're open to what people tell you and you say, yeah, I'm hearing you, that is an issue that we need to figure out how to work around. How do we do that and not lose sight of this big picture that we were trying to work towards at the same time? Then I think you can engage someone in an actual conversation. But if you immediately pick up the tug of rope and start pulling and say, yes, but, I think there's a pretty good chance that you're going to end up having a problem with this person, because now you've established that's the nature of the dynamic between you. That they're going to say something and you're going to fight them on it, and they're going to do the same thing back to you. They're going to become defensive back. So some of it, I think, is stylistic.
And we've got a few more questions in the chat room, so let's go to Virat in LinkedIn, who I can't put up on the screen. I can't, just my system doesn't talk to LinkedIn. And Virat wants to know, how do you deal with the I am right, you are wrong type of attitude that sometimes we get from managers or maybe even other coworkers, that need to be right person or that need for you to be wrong person? Are there any strategies for that person?
It's funny. It's sort of reminiscent of our talk about kind of narcissism
Malignant
and what that's
narcissist.
like.
Yeah, I was going to say, go
yeah.
watch our Seth and I did a previous podcast on dealing with malignant narcissists at work. Check the live stream playlist. But anything quickly to add to that before we get to other questions?
Sure. Yeah, I think that is a problem in a lot of work settings because it's a personality trait that's just really difficult to work with. And there are some people who, I think it boils down to why they take that position. I think a lot of people take that position because they themselves don't have a lot of self-respect. They themselves don't feel valued or respected. They might feel, again, we talked about imposter syndrome. They might be feeling like they're a bit of a fraud. For whatever the reason, the person feels the need to take this sort of contrary stand to anything that you provide them, and they have to be the one to get it right. And that is hard. I don't know that there's a single easy answer to it, but I do think acknowledging for yourself that you're going to have to pace yourself on it, but I think not allowing yourself to feel any less about your position. You can agree to disagree, and that's one of those places where I'll tell someone clearly we're not on the same page on this, and that's okay with me. I don't need to be on the same page as everybody. I know that most of the time I'm not going to be. That's fine. That's
We're
part
just
of my
not going
role.
to align, Seth.
Exactly. And that lack of alignment, if the person feels that that's the only way we're going to be able to work together, maybe we're not going to be able to work together. That's okay with me. If that person is the head of my company or my supervisor, I have to seriously question whether or not that's a job I want. If they're simply a sort of lateral colleague to me, maybe that's not the best person for me to be working with if anything productive is going to happen. Or if it's short-term project-oriented work, maybe I'm just going to have to suck it up and deal with the fact that they're really kind of obnoxious, and get through that piece of work and move on to the next one with recognizing it's not going to be great work because they are going to sabotage any sort of good outcome that's not theirs.
And speaking of previous podcasts you and I did, Kathleen is asking, how do you approach a coworker that has been gaslighting you? It feels disrespectful and it erodes your respect for them. Kathleen, Seth and I did an entire podcast on recognizing gaslighting at work. So I'm also going to recommend everybody dig into the archives. And again, you don't even have to dig too far. You can go to YouTube and search for Delta CX and then any of these words, Delta, CX, narcissists. That had the people who need to be right. Delta, CX, gaslighting. You're going to jump right into the old Seth and Deb adventures. But Seth, anything you want to add to this right now before we send Kathleen into the archives?
I was going to say I appreciate the question. It's a great one, and clearly you and I have been on the right track in that.
We're self-referential now.
This is the greatest hits of all of our podcast work together. Absolutely spot on, right? So gaslighting, people who are attempting to kind of undermine you or play with your head or kind of get in your head or in some fashion, kind of sow seeds of discontent and disrespect about you behind your back. All of these things are highly toxic in a workplace. I would absolutely recommend, catching the hour that we've chatted about it in the past, but because there's a lot of material to unpack there. But for the most part, I can just simply validate it and say to the question and to is it Kathleen? Is that right?
Kathleen, yeah.
That absolutely that is correct. I can validate and say yes, that is totally disrespectful and
it's wonderful that you could recognize it.
Yes. Yeah, it's not always easy to spot, as we've talked about. So yeah, I would absolutely encourage to go back and catch that particular episode.
Yeah, that's where we did our fantastic acting. Most of that went well. My acting is terrible. We've got about 10 minutes. No, you're fantastic. You could be anyone. I believe you are a 50-year-old school psychologist.
I try to get that. That's a role that I've got typecast into. So
remember when I was typecast as Queen of the Witches?
I do. That was actually pretty. That's pretty.
That was
cool,
Dido
though.
and Aeneas.
That was pretty cool. You know that you've made it when you're typecast as the Queen of the Witches. That's a very narrow niche, though.
I had one line, but thanks to classical music, it was like a 5-minute piece.
Well, you earned my respect there.
Oh, stop. I don't even think you went to that performance.
I really did.
You were there?
I was there. That was a Tufts, right?
Yeah. For
that.
everybody, hold on. I still have the picture on my desk. For everybody who missed some of the previous episodes, Seth and I went to college together. And this is us in like 91, I think.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Yeah. So that's why Seth was in the audience at a school opera I was singing in. Oh,
is that one going to come up every time you have me on? Just need to know that.
I have to put it in the box. I have to put it. I just haven't put it back in the box. I've got to put it in the box. The box is in the other room. Have to put it in the box. But yeah, I'll put it away. I'll try to. I have a better one of you with a big long mustache.
Oh yes, yeah. People tune in thinking that they're going to be actually watching the podcast for all the good information, but mostly it's for our witty repartee, I think.
Oh, well, if they want that, they should have tuned in last week when I had my boyfriend on doing comedy office hours. Ask Debbie's boyfriend anything. That was.
Don't forget, folks.
That was last week. It's in the archives. So Kathleen says, for me, it was more like I felt something wrong and then someone labeled it and I was like, yes, that's totally it.
Yep. And isn't that always the way with gaslighting? Because like so many things that are kind of blind spots, right? When someone's messing with your head, our nervous system is set up in such a way. I have to do at least one thing that sounds like a psychologist every episode. Our nervous systems are set up in such a way that we take whatever's in front of us as reality. That's what we do. And if your reality has been manipulated by someone to appear a certain way, most of the time, although it may raise some suspicion among us, especially the more wary folks, many of us just take it as this is my reality. It's why abusive relationships endure, because people simply tolerate them and come to accept them as, as we say in 2020, the new normal. And gaslighting is absolutely one of those insidious kinds of experiences where someone else is often the person, I think, to point it out to us. Hey, did you notice this person when they say this to you? Like, is that weird to me or is that weird to you too? Because it struck me as kind of strange. And then you stop and reflect on it, sometimes even after denying it initially and saying, no, I don't, And then inevitably you recognize, yeah, actually, I think that's what's happening here. That's how most people realize they're in an abusive relationship before it hits the absolute lowest point, is when someone else recognizes it for us and gives us the benefit of their perspective. So absolutely true.
I want to bring this full circle because we only have a few minutes left. So anybody ask your questions. But so to bring this full circle, Seth, as you know, in CX and UX, some people think that they have to earn respect and gain trust by democratizing our work. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, as if UX is some sort of authoritarian dictatorship and it needs to be democratized. And this generally means that people think that they have to earn respect and earn trust by giving up their power and autonomy and inviting others to do our tasks with us, to do UX research with us, to sketch screens and solutions with us. And they end up calling lots of team meetings. They pull people away from their work. They call these team meetings. And it almost seems like we don't even care if these people are good at our work or not. We just think we have to involve them so that they will like us. And they think we have to open up our jobs, even though we are specialized. We're just going to open it up to everybody because then they'll respect us. And I feel like if we invite people who are bad at our jobs, then And especially if we're inviting other people to make decisions in our domains when they're not inviting us to make decisions in their domains. I feel like this is not a tactic to earn respect. I'm worried it's going to create quite the opposite. And when I had researched some months ago, I read a whole bunch of different articles in famous publications on team building, how to do team building. And almost all the articles said some key elements of team building were making sure that everybody on the team understands what each other does and respecting the boundaries and specialties of those people. And I feel like that sounds like team building. All this weird stuff UX people are doing, saying, yeah, come on, research with me, just make solutions with me. I feel like that's the opposite. I know I've just been on a soapbox here. Now you say something.
Yes, dear. So I absolutely team building obviously is team building is its own thing. But I think you're absolutely right that you don't make a stronger team by diluting it and by essentially giving everyone the power of approval or disapproval for everyone else. I think it's a flaw in committee work, in board work. It's why a lot of organizations fail, quite frankly, at least in my observation. I'm not an expert on industrial organizational dynamics, but I will say the places that I've been and the places I've seen over the last, few times around the sun, that's what comes up, is that when people feel like everything has to be consensus, everyone has to agree with everyone else, everyone gets a say in everyone else's thing, no one's
work
role
by
is
committee.
unique. Right. I think that is, and sort of speaking back to the beginning, that imbalance of earned and owed respect. I think that's an abundance of owed respect, but very little, if any, earned respect, where essentially everybody becomes sort of a cookie cutter. Everyone is an identical puzzle piece, and everyone is interchangeable. And that's not true. I think it's really, really easy for us to seek approval for our work when we're people who are more empathetic, to seek permission to do what we do or to know what we know, and to speak our truth, as it were, into the conversation. And I think that's a problem. I would agree with you that essentially weakens team performance and the effectiveness of whatever everyone's trying to do.
I think it makes people respect us less. It's like, wow, Deb really can't do her job. She keeps pulling me into meetings and group thingies.
Exactly. So I don't think that's a way to earn respect. I think it's a way to seek approval or permission, to make people like you. And I think that's not necessary. Being liked is not a bad thing, but it's certainly not the be-all, end-all that's going to make someone successful in their work, and it's not going to give you respect. If anything,
and it might not deliver a better
the opposite.
And it might not deliver a better product to the customer. I mean, you and I talked about, especially when I interviewed for my book, you talked about an experience you had with a product you were using for your job. And imagine if you somehow got to be a fly on the wall at that company and you're watching the UX person groveling and twisting themselves into a pretzel, hoping people will like them.
Right. I mean, you and I share music as a common, and recording of music at times is sort of a common interest. And one thing I remember reading quite a bit from people who are recording artists is that the kiss of death for a recording artist is when they enter the studio and they lay down some tracks and they're doing some mixing, and they can't or won't speak up about their preferences artistically. They simply need other people to tell them what to do. And they desperately want to be liked so much that they end up coming up with something that's actually counterproductive. And the reasoning is, if I'm sitting in a studio with you and I need you to tell me what's good, in the end, my desire for people nodding and smiling and looking at each other approvingly is going to essentially dilute or kill any artistic expression. And what's going to come out of the process, we may love, but the rest of the world may listen to and go, that's garbage. There are some things that are not really good consensus-based kind of projects. Some things require people to push and pull a little bit in order to make it good. And I think not being afraid of a little bit of respectful dialogue that involves some confrontation at times or involves some disagreement at times, I think is perfectly okay. And if you can do it professionally and not necessarily sell yourself out, I think it's going to put you in a much better position to be able to be commanding a level of expertise and authority that people sincerely respect, as opposed to feeling like, well, he's nice and all, but I don't really think he knows what he's talking about, because every time he's trying to speak about something, he's always asking our opinion about it. I don't think he's got a lot of confidence. And so as a result, I don't really feel like he's someone that I can really look up to as an authority. I mean, Marisol's spot on. Great design is never consensus. Great art, great design.
Never consensus based.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that people can't agree on stuff, but it means it's not the result of a vote. It's not a bunch of people coming together and saying, I need you all to like me, and that's what we got to do. So let's figure out how to make that happen.
And I forgot to say this about a good half hour ago, but won't you please subscribe to the YouTube channel? We do lots of fun things here, and I hope you'll want to know about it. Tell friends. And won't you please have empathy for the like button? Won't you please show it some empathy and press it with love, gently. Boyfriend wrote these jokes, by the way. They're really good. And of course, you can join our Slack channel as well. There's no charge. It's a free community where you have access to me and other friendly people. So come on over to Slack. And on that note, I'm going to have to play us out of here because we are out of time. But Seth, as always, thank you so much for coming on. It's always great to riff with you on these different ideas and kind of see how much we have in common, even though we're in mostly different lines of work. So, and it sounds like two of my dogs are home from running in the woods. All right. Well, nice. I've got something to deal with.
It's always a pleasure, Debbie.
Everybody, send me comments and let me know what you would like to see Seth and I talk about next time, and we will plan more adventures. Seth, be well, and I'll catch you soon. Thanks again.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.